Future-Proof is sponsored by Learn Smart Academy, online revision courses for GCSE and A-Level. All your revision in one place, organised for you, interactive and game-changing. Hello and welcome to Future-Proof. Thank you so much for joining me, Sarah Hopwood, as I work my way through this new series, which is all about how to. And in the first programme, you would have seen me talking about how to cut hair, and obviously advice is to wait for your hairdresser. I just shared how I've been cutting my own hair through lockdown, and thinking of some of the challenges that lay ahead for all of us in the future. Some have more challenges than others. I wanted to maybe look at answering the question how to be better human beings, how to become better, how to make sure that we don't sabotage ourselves. You know, arguably it's difficult enough as it is, so are there any things that we could be doing, thought processes, patterns of behaviour or anything that could be actually holding us back from being as effective as we want to be, as we try and forge forward, thinking differently very often, new challenges, and sometimes not even seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. And I hope that some of this helps us identify maybe just trying out one small little new thing, or actually stopping doing something. I love the definition of a limiting belief. A limiting belief is a belief that used to serve you, so don't trash it and think it was horrendous. Usually it's a belief that used to serve you, but it doesn't serve you anymore. So to start, if you like, looking at how we can be better human beings, I want to actually start with change, because there's an awful lot of change around. Many are struggling, and when we understand change, we can sometimes then see where we are thinking, where we are on the change grid, if you like, and is there anything that we can do to speed up our navigation of the change cycle? Because if we can speed it up, it means we get to a healthier place faster. And so if you look at it, and you can see it here, the first, and you can relate it straight away to COVID as well, the first sign that change is happening is usually shock. And we can drive change out of choice if we want to. We can make a conscious decision that we're going to make a change. But if not, then it usually happens through crisis. And so the first sign is usually shock. And if you look, the line that word shock is very close to is the vertical line of self-esteem. And if you think of COVID as well, whilst people were shocked, the self-esteem doesn't actually dive right down as far as it's going to go through the cycle. Because in that shock, we then quickly often move into this area of disbelief. Well, yes, this is awful and terrible, but actually it won't affect me. That's why people smoke. That's why people pursue drinking too much alcohol and other things, because sometimes we're wired to think, yes, this is terrible and awful, but it won't happen to me. And so when we get into that disbelief, the self-esteem actually starts to go up. Before then, self-doubt starts to come in. And change, the active shift of moving from, if you like, an old pattern of behaviour or thought, and where change takes place and we start moving to a new, is when we see point 4, which is the word acceptance. And when I talked about this before, I've always said, please look where acceptance sits on that vertical line of self-esteem. Acceptance happens when our self-esteem is at its lowest. But very, very often, and there are others that would argue it and saying, but all the time your self-esteem is up, you're going to keep fighting and arguing the odds and all the rest of it. Usually we only, if you like, give in to change when we're worn down. And that wearing down often can be visibly seen in our levels of self-esteem. So acceptance takes place, you kind of sigh and go, oh, okay, fine, what is it I've got to do? And then you start, point 5, experimenting with that new behaviour and thought process. And if you think, then maybe that's when we start thinking, okay, maybe I ought to have an inoculation. And it could be then you go, oh, I didn't want to, but I'm going to do it now. And then you have a search for meaning. So after that, you go, oh, good. Well, if I do have the vaccine, then that means I can go perhaps on holiday, or I can go and see a relative. And you start then linking a reason for it, and then you integrate it, becomes a habit or whatever. And I think certainly with the COVID situation, vaccines could well be around as an annual thing like the flu jab or something similar, and it then becomes part of a habit, and we turn it from raw decision making into habits. So that's the human response to change. But if we're thinking about being better human beings, then it's quite good to then maybe compare ourselves to artificial intelligence and compare ourselves to computers and think, okay, what is it that they do that they're smart on, where we can sometimes sabotage ourselves because we're human beings, and maybe in that we are struggling with change. And the things that I've noticed here is, if you think of a computer will never take offence. It doesn't react emotionally. It doesn't engage in conflict. If there's an argument going on and there's a robot around, it will just walk straight past. It won't engage, not unless it's been programmed to engage. It won't be persuaded. A computer does what it's told to do. It won't get into persuasion. It lacks curiosity. It never forgets, and it doesn't care whether things are fair or not. It doesn't feel regret, anger. It doesn't feel courage. It doesn't get jealous. It doesn't lack self-control. It doesn't love. It doesn't get distracted. A computer won't manipulate others, not unless it's being programmed to do that. It doesn't need sleep. It doesn't feel happy or sad. Ideas, that's one that you might argue with, because some programs they're designed to solve problems, so some might argue that therefore it comes up with new ideas, new solutions. It doesn't feel shame. A computer doesn't get stressed. It doesn't become defensive, and it never argues with you, not unless it's being programmed to. But in that case, it wouldn't necessarily argue. It would just keep repeating a point. A computer does have replaceable parts, so it's not sort of irreplaceable. It does care about what Gen Y think and Gen X. It doesn't care, but it would be programmed to. And it also, you got to think of the programming, whether Gen Y, Gen X are programming them, because then you can fall into the discussion about conscious and unconscious bias, because a computer does what it's programmed to do, and so therefore what is in the mind of the person or the team that are programming it, and are there any unconscious biases in there, which perhaps need addressing. They don't sabotage themselves, other people, and they never ever get anxious. So they don't accuse others. Do they have unconscious bias? That's the discussion I've just had. They don't procrastinate, and they don't resist change. And the big thing which can eat away at a business, it can cost a business an awful lot of money through conflict, through people being absent, i.e. out of the workplace, or actually sat at their desks, but emotionally and mentally they're absent. It doesn't get involved with the blame culture. And in large organisations, I've worked in teaching, I've worked in the NHS, and blame cultures in some of these areas can be so rife that they can become destructive if we're not careful. So it says here, AI starts at the beginning. It has no self-talk that focuses on what it wants. It has no fight, flight or freeze. If you think of conflict, that's the first response. Fight, flight, freeze or die. If you think of back in the centuries ago, but many years ago, tribal behaviour, then if you froze, then you were in danger of dying if an animal was coming at you. So it was fight, flight, freeze or die. Now obviously the dying generally doesn't happen. So I want to then move on to think about Tony Robbins. For those of you who may or may not know him, he talks about 6 basic human needs, and we'll go into these in more detail in the second half. But he basically says that we will get our 6 basic human needs from 4 sources, which is ourselves, our family, in our work, or in our general community. And we are either in survival mode or we are in fulfillment mode. And the whole purpose, if you like, of understanding this is trying to move to fulfillment as soon as you can. So it starts with control and security. If you think of people with habits and addictions, that's them. Variety and difference. It's amazing that you want control and security, and yet if you have too rigid patterns of behaviour with no real change, you'll go in and sabotage it or do something to create variety and difference. Significance and importance is really important in the workplace. Usually rates a lot higher than salary. When you ask what people want, they want to feel part of an organisation. They want love and connection. Teamwork is really, really important. But if somebody's worried about getting food, air and water to their family, don't try and inspire them about teamwork. You need to sort out those hierarchy of needs first, and then this is where fulfilment takes place. Growth, learning, legacy and contribution, which I'm going to be covering in the second half.